Hello, folks. Good, real nice to have my friend Dion again. Today, he's going to talk about the state of IT services, what he's seeing, and it's going to be a global view because he's doing this from France. Dion, good
Yes.
to have you again. And France. Well, let's start with France. Let's talk about the food. Let's talk about the wine. Let's talk about your view you have. And
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Vinnie. It's always great to talk to you. So yeah, right now I'm finishing up my a year-long trip to France so that our little twins can learn French and French culture. And yeah, the food is consistently great. I mean, this is you can't be in business as a restaurateur in France without having great food. So all the food is good, and it's relatively inexpensive compared to the U.S. And the same thing with wine is that you can get really good wine for $3-4 a bottle. Yeah, because again, you can't sell bad wine here in France. So life is good. Certain things are more expensive than the U.S. So anything to do with services or people tends to be expensive. But the finer things in life, food and drink are cheap. So it's great. Thanks, Vinny.
you're twins. I mean, there's such a fantastic couple to start with. And now they'll be speaking more languages. God, they're polymaths from age 3.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is that twins mean there's always double trouble with everything, right? So, but it's amazing, Vinny. The topic of the day is AI and how fast it can learn and everything. But I tell you, really young people, they learn faster than anything. At 7 or 8, they can learn a language in about a year, and they're already saying things I don't understand. So it's been a successful experiment.
Well, Diane, let's talk about services. Do you have a graphic? Do you have something to kick it off?
Well, you know me, Vinny. I always have some sort of visual. So let me bring up my current view, one of my big giant graphs.
Yep.
And so we began to see that just like some,
Diane, it's not busy enough. I'm just a Gartner graphics,
Well, I always try and put everything that you really have to deal with. Everyone tries to oversimplify things, and then the real world turns out to be messier. So I try and split the difference. So I take it as a badge of pride that I show all the real things that CIOs have to deal with. But it's funny, Vinny, just like so many things in IT used to be haphazard. We would just onboard apps as they occur, and then we would say, well, can we start systematically integrating these and create service-oriented architectures? Can we create rational portfolios of IT that aren't just a bunch of what every department ordered up, but we actually help them and guide them? And now the same thing is happening with software services. So we began to see, it started with a lot of the big SIs saying, you know what, we can kind of be your services company of record, and we'll herd all the cats for you, right? So, you might have a bunch of cybersecurity and service desk and IT modernization, license optimization, break fix and monitoring, and all those types of services from bunch of different companies, but they're not connected into a real cohesive process inside your IT organization. What if we could come in and manage some of those for you? And I don't see anybody switching over to fully unified software services, but I'm seeing now this desire to say, I don't want to deal with 100 service providers. I want to deal with 25 really high quality service providers who they can package up a lot of the support services, managed services, and professional services. And that's really starting to happen. So, we're seeing, big companies, and they're like HCL and Cognizant and Tata, and they're being subsumed by, Accenture, who else do I really see doing this a lot? Wipro is doing this. They have a series of frameworks in every industry where they bring a bunch of partners underneath that and then say we have one unified offering. Rimini Street is doing this for end of life and beyond end of life type of thing. So it's very interesting.
And how is that likely to change? Well, go ahead. Keep. So that's one trend. People are consolidating, coming up with a more unified service management model. What other trends do you see?
Well, there's a real desire by the CIO to simplify IT. And so this is one of the ways they're doing this. So complexity management has become one of the top issues. If you look at a lot of the CIO surveys and you say, what's your biggest pain point? They say 2 things. Number one, cybersecurity. Number two, complexity. Everything's got to be integrated. Everything has to be supported well. We don't want to have these big backlogs anymore, because then we just create more shadow IT. So we need to move faster. And so what CIOs are doing is looking for ways of doing that. And then we have things like low code, which are becoming a real deal. I'm running a case study of a large mortgage company who became large because they only use low code to develop their mortgage services. They hire mortgage experts, mortgage professionals. They teach them low code, and then they build all their mortgage origination and other services. So about 90 to 95% of their IT is all low code developed. And so they need services to manage all these things because it creates a lot more IT a lot faster. You can develop 5 to 10 times faster using low code. And regular professional developers won't touch it, but you can get business people to do it. These are changes we've never seen before. I've never seen that happen before, and I've been looking. And so a lot of this is the same thing the same simplification is happening on unified software services to tackle more complexity. You can do a lot more now if you don't have to manage 100 suppliers that are not integrated. If you manage 25 suppliers that are much more integrated, that's the big trend. That's what we're seeing in the large.
You make a great point about low code and not needing IT developers, right? You can take savvy business users and teach them low code. I would think that's a threat to some of the service providers, right? Because you can take your own business domain experts and build vertical processes with some of that expertise. Or is that too much of a stretch?
I think that's exactly what is happening. I'm seeing it on the leading edge, though. Obviously, this is not even an early majority type of trend yet, but I'm seeing it for companies that can't hire professional developers. If you're a Midwestern, mortgage company and you're trying to compete with the big guys, you can't get the top developers to work for you. So you have to change the rules. And so this mortgage company I'm talking about is not in a major market. But they've grown from a few hundred to, I think the last I heard was 2,000 employees. Home Point Mortgage is who it is, and so it's a fascinating story. But it's how IT survives, how IT in other markets outside of the tech centers, outside of the big cities, the big markets, how they compete and say, well, I'm going to change the rules. So I also see that the SIs doing the same thing. So Accenture and Deloitte are using low code extensively as well. So they're also doing the same thing.
I don't think it's just a regional thing, man. I've written a couple of books in the last couple of years where I've seen a whole bunch of new business applications become necessary, right? Because of COVID, we saw telemedicine and a few other things in healthcare, right? Retail, we needed curbside check-in because of digital transformation, e-commerce. Intelligent returns have become important, right? So probably 100 different apps that have emerged: EV battery charging, smart insurance. So for all of this, unfortunately, software vendors are not delivering the functionality, and integrators take too long to do it. I can see a lot more need for, extensions to traditional systems, but done by domain experts.
And you'd be right, Vinnie. That's the big trend. There's 24 times more non-coders than coders,
Wow.
But everyone is a coder. Like everyone uses spreadsheets, or I would say most knowledge workers know how to use spreadsheets. And if you know how to do that, you can pretty much develop low code these days, which is a way better way than automating your business with a spreadsheet. So there's just a large untapped capacity that we badly need to tap into. For our modern economies, we need a lot more app dev, and that's how we're going to tap into it.
What else are you seeing in terms of trends?
So we see that services, IT services really still mostly populate the low end. So you're talking about support services, things like cybersecurity, incident management, service desk, getting your licenses in order. I talked about the break fix and monitoring. But of course, we've had these managed services. That's the middle of this diagram. That's the more sophisticated services. So things like getting into DevOps and DevSecOps, dealing with all the tax, legal, and regulatory issues that you have around IT. And taxes, by the way, this year in IT, there's a new law that says you have to amortize your application development over 5 years. You can't write it off in the year that you have it. Is creating enormous headaches for companies. I don't know if you've been tracking that story, Vinnie, but it's, companies are having to take out multi-million-dollar loans to pay their taxes this year on app dev. As the big tech companies can survive that, but the smaller tech companies can't. And so these managed service providers are ahead of that curve. They've been preparing their companies. And so they're really able to offer value add, where a lot of companies have been blindsided if you haven't been using managed services in that area, right? So, but where it's really getting strategic is now support services and managed services are wired deeply into your organization, but now you have to transform. So what happens when you go to your support services company and managed services service providers and say, I need help now with the more important things that'll help me survive long term. I need digital transformation, full IT monetization. I need everything you're doing integrated into my IT strategy. I want detailed system and application migration plans so I can modernize, so that I can transform. Help me do that. And a lot of the managed service providers and support services, they're like, huh? We're deep in your services stack. We're not strategic. And so this is where the unified software services companies are saying, well, they say, we already have all this. So we're already wired in at the low level, because you usually start on the left of this diagram, the simple things. And then companies want more and more from their service providers. But where most service providers are failing is on that last transition to really true professional services, the real transformation of the organization, both on the business and digital side, as well as all the things required to support that. And so this is where there's now a hunger saying, I want somebody, when I grow up big enough, and I'm mature enough, I want to be able to call on my services folks who know our business better than anybody else. They know IT better than anybody else. I need to be able to call on them. And that's what's driving this real unification trend, saying that if I had used a provider that has everything from tactical to strategic, I'd now be able to move faster. But now I have to try and transform through these IT services companies that don't understand transformation. They understand cybersecurity, they understand, application development, but they don't understand how to transform my business. But they're embedded, and I can't change I'd have to change the whole team. And so we're seeing these larger companies. It's the same trend we've seen everywhere. It's eventually that everything grows up and becomes more strategic and goes up the stack. And this is what's happening. And
from a supplier point of view, there's always been a resistance to think small, right? I've been telling service providers for a decade, you need to automate some of these stuff you do. You've done 1,000 of these. There is no reason to keep doing it once again, with 100 people.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
They've always been reluctant to do that. And what you're talking about is similar, right? You got to think small here, you got to think low code and all that. And they just worry about, hey, it's going to shrink our project size so much. We can make money at that. Yes, you can make money. If different forms of automation, you can still make money. So.
Well, you bring up a really good point. A lot of what service providers can do can be automated, but the resistance is that your justification, basically charging by the hour for very expensive human labor, goes away. So they say, well, if I can't show that I have 1,000 hours in supporting your organization, and I have to mark up 1,000 hours, against our agreed upon markup rate, then I can't prove that I actually provided that value. And so I'm working with a lot of services companies right now who are trying to go to value-based pricing. And the biggest hurdle is getting away from the bodies per hour model, which is proof that, that service costs that much to deliver. Because when you do it without people, now it's harder to justify that high rate. And so there's a big struggle to make that transition. It's the holy grail. It's the price on value, not on hours. And so there's a big discussion here, but it also goes hand in hand with, as much as CIOs want integrated services like this, they want unification so that I can say, help me take all my tactical things and now let them help me orchestrate them so I can transform and modernize. And the other force that CIOs are dealing with is too many eggs in one basket. That's why I'm saying you're not going to go from 100 suppliers down to 5. You should probably go from 100 suppliers down to 25, because you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. That means you will have less than perfect optimization, but you're also not beholden to one single provider. And I think that's still the real concern, is having one large provider that they're the only ones that know how your IT department fully works. And it's very hard to be able to switch horses at that point. So I think you do have to balance the forces. So unified software services is just a trend. It's not going to take over your business. I don't think most CIOs are going to allow that to happen. So I think that's an important point to make.
Dan, what does it mean for global supply chains? It doesn't mean the West is going to be able to do a lot more of the work right here with domain experts. Are you seeing any trends in terms of global supply chains?
Yes. So the big trend that's been driven by both the pandemic and geopolitics, and just shaky supply chains in general, is not to, again, to move the work around. So nearshoring is really big, again, and it's particularly South America and the United States. If you're talking about the United States, is saying, well, let's keep people in our time zone, but we don't have any big markets offshore. Well, now it turns out that South America has been graduating finally a lot of people in the IT business. So there are several million available resources in South America who now do have degrees in these things, and they're now available and they're cheap still. So nearshoring is one of these. And now, of course, Vinnie, we'd be remiss in not talking about AI.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've played around with ChatGPT and its ability to write code, but I've sat down and written some really tough coding questions, and it writes the code perfectly almost every single time. I then can copy and paste that into Java or Python, and it runs perfectly. And I'm writing asking it to write some really tough, functions to solve real business problems or call APIs or whatever. I ask the question, and about 3 seconds later, the code comes out perfectly written. That's changing everything. I can do this with bash scripts too. So all the things that operations people do, I have to write these really, really tricky shell scripts for operations tasks. All of the pain and a lot of the failure has been taken out of that, and a lot of the value in terms of how to price for it. So one of the other alternative sources for labor now for IT in a big way, suddenly in the last 3 months, is AI. And I'm seeing a lot of people trying to tend to that. And it has all sorts of implications, but it's going to impact software services. But of course, the services companies are going to be the first to leap on that. It's just going to affect their profits potentially.
Great. Well, what else? You've got this complex chart. Anything else you want to touch on?
Oh, there's always plenty of things. So a lot of this moving to the cloud, that's really happening. Most new workloads are going out to public cloud, but there's a lot of realization as these large bills come in that maybe once you understand your operational profile and you don't have a lot of variability in it, people are looking at repatriating back, and they need help to say, I need to go back and put things back into a colo, or maybe even for a data center for optimized things that we do every day that doesn't vary very much, right? So like our analytics reports every day, if that profile, if we don't need the elasticity of the cloud to survive Black Friday, I might be 40 or 50% cheaper back in my own data center. So we're seeing repatriation is becoming not a major trend, but more and more people as cloud costs continue to rise. And so we're seeing FinOps, that's the cloud management practice around financial discipline, real-time financial discipline in the cloud, making sure you're not running a single workload that isn't necessary, not leaving instances running. That's the biggest problem, is we see a lot of IT departments leave instances running when they should shut them down, but they just don't have the maturity in their automated operations to do this yet. So FinOps is becoming, I'm updating this diagram. You'll see FinOps on the next version of this, is becoming a major demand, saying, hey, you're already wired across so many of my services. I need to make sure you're integrated into my FinOps. In fact, can you just run FinOps for me? We don't have expertise in that, but you, as a service provider, probably do have early expertise in FinOps. So that's another big trend that we're seeing.
I think that would be probably very high in most CIOs' priority, right? Because elasticity is a reason cloud is important, but what was variable has turned fixed, and fixed is very expensive at running in the cloud. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what everybody's learning. So we're seeing that that a little more diversity in cloud profiles. Some things really belong in public, and some things are better in hybrid or private, and that's a reality. But you need FinOps across all those things to be able to dynamically decide where the best place to run a workload is. Because sometimes, you can get these instances, these spot instances from the cloud providers where they're like, well, we're not going to use these. You want to bid a low price for these and use these. I mean, you want all of that integrated in your FinOps, and so that's going to be added to this as well. So AI, FinOps, more intelligent, reorganization of labor across services and nearshoring, and some other trends. So it's interesting. It's an exciting time for services. It's growing up. So.
But everything you're pointing to is saying more and more automation, which is something I've been pushing for a decade. So if the service provider is not willing to do it, it'll be done to them. So that's another great.
I agree. It's going to affect their revenue potentially, and certainly their profitability. So they're trying to figure out how to get there. So I'm now seeing a big push. I've had to do a number of workshops on how do I do value-based pricing? How do I keep my numbers up when I'm automating everything? Because now we're seeing so much IT needing to be built and not enough people to build it and manage it and run it. And the only way we're going to survive that is through automation. Is just going to change the economic model of IT quite a bit, and of professional services. So everyone's trying to figure out what that's going to look like. So we're in a very exciting, pioneering era of automated software services, IT services. And so it's going to be interesting.
Fantastic, Dan. Any final words?
Well, I believe we're now entering really the plateau of productivity around a lot of things, including automation, as you mentioned, Vinnie. AI now is going to be the biggest topic. It's going to transform virtually everything. The competitive needle in a lot of industries has been reset to zero. So I think we're going to see a lot of exciting and mostly positive trends, but there's going to be some disruption. There's going to be, not everyone's going to get through this. And so I think that these unified software services will become more automated in a very intelligent and useful way. But in the short term, there's going to be some dislocation, and we're seeing some of that with IT employment. But I think there's still so much work. Everyone's just going to move more to AI and automation. And that's where they're going to focus on, as opposed to actual delivery.
So the only thing I would slightly disagree with you is I think AI is being hyped up right now. It'll probably take a little while to start to really make an impact, but most of
the only way that's gonna, what I'm seeing AI capable of doing is nothing short of shocking to me. And I'm on the ground trying a lot of these things out. I think the only thing that's going to happen, I do think the government's going to move in. That we're already seeing calls for moratoriums on AI. That's what's most likely to slow it down, is regulation and some sort of say, let's pause before we create things we can't yet control. So. We'll see, Vinnie. So we'll have to place another bet, right? So I think we're still on for dinner in 2025.
That was related to form of AI, machine learning, and autonomous cars. So Diane, maybe you can have a meal wherever you do your take your twins in 2025.
Yeah, that sounds great. I would love that.
Thank you again.
Thanks for having me, Vinnie. It was great to talk.
Thank you.